Welcome friends to Farm Fresh Designs 59. In today's video, I'm going to take 3 Dollar Tree planters and turn them from drab to fab. So let's get started. My first planter is actually the largest one I'll be making over, and I start by putting Dixie Belle bonding balls on it to use as a primer. Once that dries and sets up, then I put fusion paint in the color cast iron all over this planter. And this planter was inspired by something that I saw on Pinterest, and it gave me the idea actually for this entire video. So I'm going to be using the IOD's Trimmings 3 mold all around the base of this. And I will show you many molds today, but I always want to show you the entire process. So if you've not used molds before, you put cornstarch in your mold, and I personally use DOS air dry clay, and you just kind of put it in your hand and roll it around and get it warm, and then I push it into that mold, and the IOD molds have a micro rim on it, and that helps to kind of push that clay right up against it, and you're not wasting clay. So you push it all in, and then I like to personally take just an old gift card and run over the back of it, and then that smooths it out. And then I'm going to be putting it on with Tight Bond Thick and Quick. Now this glue, it takes about 10 to 15 minutes to set up, but because I'm going to need to make several castings of this mold, I like for the first one to be good and dry before I actually do the second one, because I know that once I put that first one on, if I put the second one on too soon, then I might have some little parts that it would kind of smush a little bit on that first one. So actually, after it's set up about 10 to 15 minutes, I go ahead and put just a coat of white paint on it, because if you put paint on your molds before they set up completely, then it helps to reduce the cracking. And I use a really soft bristle brush, and I kind of dab it on a little bit, and then that way none of the detail gets messed up on it when I put that first coat of paint on it. Now, one thing I like about the IOD trimmings mold is that many of them will have little sections on either end, so that if you have to make a second piece of it, they sort of fit together really well. And then that also helps to not have any little gaps in it. And so once again, I make another mold of that. And then if you'll watch, this is how you can make them connect when you put them together. And even after it dries, if you see any little part that there's a little gap in it, you can just take a little piece of air dry clay and kind of stick it in there a little bit. And then once it's painted, you're not going to notice it. And then after I get that second mold put on it, then I realize that there's just a little space left to be able to finish off down at the bottom. So working on this planter actually took me about 2 days, because I wanted to make sure that the molds were dry before I added too much more. And you'll notice on here, it's not going to be exactly what it needs to be, but also this will be the back of the planter, so you won't see this part. But honestly, if you don't know to look for it, it's not something that's really noticeable. But I was able to connect 2 of the pieces where it kind of curves in, and then the other piece curves out. Now, this is the part that I realized after I did it that I messed up. What I was going to do was I was going to put a crackle finish on this top coat of black, and then I was going to put white on it. And I just forgot. So I decided later on then I would use my crackle stamp just to kind of get that effect. So once I put that white paint on it, because it doesn't have a sealer, then I put a clear sealer on it, my Rust-Oleum matte sealer that I spray on there, because now I'm using just part of a transfer from the new IOD Katharina. And you need to put a clear sealer on it if your paint doesn't have a sealer on it, because if you put it on without a sealer, there is a chance that it won't stick really well, and that it may attach to the paint, and then that transfer is not going to go on very well. And then once I put it on, I realized I need to add just a little bit more to it just kind of finish it up to make it not look like it stops just in one place. Because in just a minute, I'm going to be putting some molds up underneath it. And with the transfer, you use the transfer tool that IOD gives you, and you just rub it over that plastic sheeting. And then I rub the little transfer tool all over it, and then I go back to the beginning, and I begin to pull it up as I move along until I get it all finished. And then I use that plastic sheeting to rub over it, and that's called burnishing it. So this is the IOD Dainty Flourishes, and these little molds are pretty skinny. So with these, actually, I went on and put them in the mold, and I put them up in the freezer for about 20 minutes. And you can do 15 to 20 minutes. And what it does is it just sets up that clay just enough to where when you try to like pull it out, then it doesn't like tear at all. But once you take that clay out and it comes back to room temperature, then it looks just like it did before you put it up in the freezer. And I needed just a little section of this skinny part, so I held them up together and cut them both in the same spot so that it would look right once I put them on, and that both of them would be cut at the same spot. And then I put one going one way down at the bottom, and then the other one will be going the other way. And then once I put those pieces down at the bottom, I realized that I needed just a little bit more of that transfer that I had cut off. So I'll go back later and I will add to it down at the bottom. Now, these little pieces actually come from part of the IOD Juliet mold because I just needed some little leaves. And so I just really was careful about where I put my clay. And that's what I really love about the IOD molds, is that you don't have to use the entire thing. You can just use different pieces of it, and it all just looks really good together. So once I get those pieces glued on, I wait for about 10 to 15 minutes before I go back and paint it. And if I know that even if I'm going to paint it a different color later on, or if I haven't decided what color I'm going to use, then I still go ahead and paint it with white, because that just goes ahead and gets it painted so that it won't crack later on. And because I kind of chopped up that little transfer initially, I still have enough of that little green down at the bottom to kind of fill out that little spot. And then I went back to the Dainty Flourishes and I made 2 more of those molds, and I put those up at the top. And then also on that Dainty Flourishes, one of those little molds in there has a little, not a really crown up at the top, but a little pointed thing up at the top. So I put clay only in that little spot, and then I'm going to put that up at the top between those 2 pieces, and I'm just going to kind of have it hanging down. And then that way it just sort of kind of makes it look a little bit more even, and I'll just like the way it turned out. And so because I really wanted a crackle finish on it, then I took out my IOD Vintage Texture stamp. It actually has 4 different little stamps in it, and one is the crackle finish. So I just used the IOD Stone Gray ink and put it on that little stamp, and then I just kind of put it in different little spots. Now the next piece is just a year that I actually wanted to stamp right onto the pot, and I tried, but because of the uneven texture, it just didn't do right. So I painted over it, and then I stamped onto just a white napkin, which was 3-ply, and I just separated the plies. And then I'm going to just decoupage that napkin right onto the planter. And initially, I wanted to put some script on it, so I actually stamped part of the ephemeral type stamp, and then I didn't use it because it just didn't look right. And so what I did was I pulled out some of the script from the IOD Lover of Flowers, which came out last year, and I just put that transfer up at the top on the rim over to the side. And then right here, I'm just going to use a decoupage medium. I'm just going to just brush it straight on and just really easy put that year on it. And then because the napkin was white and the background is white, really you couldn't even notice that there was a difference in it. You couldn't tell that it was a napkin after it dried. And then I just used that crackle stamp all over it, but I didn't do it just one long piece of crackle. I just did little sections of it and just put it here and there. Now, because those molds are white, I really wanted to bring out the detail. So the first thing I did was I used a clear wax all over it and let that set up for a little bit. And then I pulled out my Dixie Belle Grunge Gray Wax. And I really like this wax because it's not as dark as a black wax, but depending on how much you put on, it makes it really easy for it to be lighter or for darker. So I want it to be more on the details and less on just the planter. So when I put my clear wax on, I let it set up, and then I put the grunge gray on it, and then I wipe it back so that that wax goes into the details. Now, the reason you want to put clear wax on first is because if you start with a darker wax and you don't like it, then it's going to be harder for you to wipe it back. But if you put clear wax on first, that kind of sets it just a little bit so that once you put on that dark wax, if you think you've got it too dark, then it will wipe back really easy. Or if you still can't get it to come off, then put a little bit of clear wax on your little shop towel and rub over that dark wax and it'll pull it up a lot. But I always like to use clear wax first. And then I just worked my way all around the planter, not only on the details and on the molds, but over the entire piece. But I wanted this planter to look like it was a little bit older, so that's why I put that dark wax on it, because I wanted to kind of grunge it up just a little bit. So tell me, what do you think about this first planter from Dollar Tree for $1.25? So my next planter is one that you're going to remember that you've probably seen at Dollar Tree before. And it has some twine around at the top that's glued on. Well, I wanted to get rid of that, so I just started pulling it off. But the little hairs from the twine, they were really glued on. So I tried using some packing tape, and I would rub it on and pull it back really hard to try to get rid of it. And it was just pretty impossible. But because I was going to add texture to this, I decided to just leave it on there. So I'm going to start with some salt wash, and I'm using a Dixie Belle Blue. And I believe it's Dusty Blue, but I'm not sure. So I just put a little bit of salt wash in, and then I pour a little bit of paint in it. And I just keep putting salt wash in it until I get the consistency that's thicker than a pancake batter. But I don't want it to be too thick. I don't want it to clump on my piece. And I just stir it until I'm happy with the texture of it. Now, I want this down at the bottom of this little planter. So I just use a little piece of painter's tape and put that all around it. And then I just kind of dab it on and just use an old bristle brush to put it on, because I want that texture in this particular paint. And then once I finish that, then I just pull the painter's tape off, because I'm going to be doing something different up at the top. So the first time I put on the Dixie Belle bonding balls, just because it's a metal and it's slick, and I just knew that that bonding balls would be a good primer on it. So this time I'm going back to my Fusion paint that's in cast iron, and I put that all over at the top. And even if it just went into that blue just a little bit, you'll see in a minute how I cover up that line between the blue and the top part of it. So this time I remembered that I wanted to do a crackle finish on it, but then when I got my crackle finish out, I realized I didn't have enough. So I went back to that old faithful way that we used to use, where I just put some school glue on it and I just brushed that all over it. And once it kind of had set up a little bit and was a little bit tacky, then I went in and I brushed a white paint all over that black. And when I use this method, I like to only brush one way, and I don't like to go over that paint too much. And then I use just a little heat gun to dry it, because when you put that heat to it, then it helps that cracking to set up. And I had to do this in little spurts because my hand was in there, and I realized once I started doing it that that metal was going to get hot with that heat gun. So I had to do a little bit and I had to stop because, well, it was going to burn my hand if I kept on holding to that metal. But I got the effect that I wanted. So this is the IOD frames mold. This is actually the Frames 1 mold, and a lot of us use this because it's wonderful. It's got a lot of different frames inside of it. And so I just use my cornstarch and my clay, and I use the gift card over it to smooth it out, and then I put it on with Titebond Thick and Quick. And then after it's set up, about 10 to 15 minutes, then I just go in with my white paint and paint over that, because in just a minute I'm going to be putting something on top of that frame. Now, this little piece that I'm going to put that separates the blue and the white comes from the IOD Classic Elements, and you'll see me use that mold quite a bit. And I put one on either side of that little frames mold, and then I'm going to decoupage some of this blue floral paper that I actually used in last week's video just on top of that frames. And then there was a little part that I forgot to film, and it's just a little piece on the Anchithus mold, and I put that between those two pieces of the Classic Elements. So once all that dried, I put the clear wax on it, and then I pull out my grunge gray again. Now remember how I told you I wanted that texture down at the bottom? Well, this is why I wanted that texture at the bottom, because when I put on that grunge gray wax, if I had put it on a slick surface, you're not going to notice it as much. But because I put that salt wash in it, then it just added a lot more to it. And then I actually just put it all over the entire planter because I wanted it to look old and rustic. And any planter size would be really good for this technique, where you put a darker color on the bottom and a lighter color up at the top, and then put molds on it to separate it. So tell me, what do you think about this particular planter? So my last planter is something that I know that if you have been in Dollar Tree, you have seen this type of planter for a really long time. And so this one is pretty easy. So once again, I put the black on it and I put the school glue on it, and then I put the white paint on it to make that crackle finish. So now I'm just going to be using the new IOD sparrow nest, and I'm going to be putting the nest on it with eggs, and then I use the little bird that's sitting on a branch. And then at this point, I think that I'm just going to leave it white. So I go ahead and paint all of that white because I think that at this point, I'm just going to put some stain over it. And you'll see in just a minute how I change that. But I wanted to use the IOD Blossoms mold just to have some little florals that would sort of fall over onto that nest. So I just used little pieces of that particular mold. And I really love this new mold. In fact, I think I may have used it in every video since it came out. But I love the florals on this, and I like that they're so small and there's lots of different pieces to it. So at this point, I think this is really all I'm going to do to finish it off. And I use the Paint Couture Brown Sugar Glaze, and I will share the link to that in the description box below because I buy mine from Johnny with Carolina's Cottage, and I will make sure to share that link below. And also in the description box below, I will also share the links to the decoupage paper and all of the IOD products that I have used today. And I get all of my decoupage paper and all of my IOD from Decoupage Central. So if you're wanting any of these products, make sure to go to the description box and find the links to those. So on this, I just brush on a little bit at a time, and then I wipe it back, and then I do a little bit more. And with this little sugar glaze, I actually do not put a clear wax on up underneath it because it's not like wax, it's more of a glaze. So it's easier to pull off once you brush it on if you think you've gotten it too dark. But what I like to do as a rule of thumb is to do just a little bit at a time. So now I decided that I would pull out some different colors of paint, which this is not something I've always been comfortable with, but I really like the way that this turned out this time. So the blue is actually a Waverly chalk paint color, Dusk, and I paint the bird and the little eggs with that. And then I use the Waverly chalk paint in the color Celery to paint the little leaves that are kind of stuck inside of the nest. And then I use Rust-Oleum Blush Pink for the little florals. Well, once I had it set up and I let it dry, I realized that they just were not dark enough. So I came back and I filled in that again. And I'm really happy with the way that it turned out because it's not just so bright and right in your face, but it's just really soft, and I think it adds so much to this piece. So tell me, what do you think about this last planter? And all of these came from the Dollar Tree. And also, if you have not gone to my Facebook page, which is Farm Fresh Designs, every week, on Wednesdays at 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, I do a live video where I do a project in just about an hour, and it's just a good time for us to get to know each other and be able to do that live chat with each other. So I'd like to invite you to my Facebook page, especially on Wednesdays at 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. So tell me in the comments below, which one is your favorite planter? Now, if you've watched my channel before, you know that I have talked about how I am not good at keeping plants alive. So most of the greenery that I use is always just faux greenery that I get either at Hobby Lobby or IKEA. But I actually bought a fern plant to put in that big planter, but because I know that it's not going to make it if I try to grow it. So once I get this filming done, I'm actually going to give the fern to my mom because she has a green thumb and that was not something that I inherited from her. So that fern will actually be going to my mom, and it's beautiful, and I actually bought it at Trader Joe's just recently. So if you enjoyed the video, make sure to hit the like button and subscribe to my channel and become part of our family. And if no one has told you today, I just want you to know that I love you and God loves you. And I hope you have a wonderful week.